First of all, I suppose I should do some introductions. For those of you who don't know me, I spend a lot of my time helping organizations with their new approaches to learning, and particularly collaborative and social learning. And I've been very fortunate to work with some organizations who are really pushing the boundaries of what it means to work for workplace learning nowadays. And some of the people I've worked with are in this room today, which is great. So you might know me through that, but you might also know me through my website. I have an online presence called the Center for Learning and Performance Technologies, and there I just try to share everything that I find out about what's happening, new technologies, trends, tools that are happening around us. And two things that are really quite popular on the site are the directory of learning tools. I try to aggregate lots of lists of tools, and my top 100 tools activity. Every year I ask people to contribute to that and create a list of 100 tools for learning, and it's now on its 6th year, so that's quite a popular resource. I'm obviously on all the social media channels, and if you haven't connected with me there, you'll find me on Twitter, Facebook, every place like that. And I tend to use the username C4LPT, which stands for Center for Learning and Performance Technologies. So I do have a Jane Hart account, but that's really more personal, so please feel free to connect with me there. I write regular blog postings about the future of work and the future of learning, sometimes a little bit controversial, but it's about the way I think learning is changing in the workplace. And an initiative I started last year is something called the Social Learning Centre, which is very much a community of learning professionals from around the world. And I know we've got some of the members of the Social Learning Centre here today. And we run regular workshops, online workshops, looking at some of the new trends that are happening in the workplace learning. And I run that with Harold Jarkey, who is one of my colleagues at the Internet Time Alliance. And we are a group of people from around the world, US, Canada, as Charles Jennings there from the UK as well. We act as a kind of think tank, if you like, about the future for workplace learning, but we also have connections with organizations around the world who are trying, again, to push the boundaries, to help their people work smarter. So that's a little bit about me. This is obviously a session about social learning, and we obviously need to be a little bit social. So I'd like you now to introduce yourselves, but you've got some tables, nice tables there, but not just to introduce yourself, to think about what you understand by this term social learning. It's been around for quite a while now, but unfortunately, it's beginning to have a lot of different definitions. So what do you understand by that term, social learning? We're going to spend about 5 minutes for you to have a little chat on your tables, and please try and find somebody you don't know or you've never spoken to before to try and talk this through for just a few minutes, and then I'll share with you some of my thoughts. But we're here to do looking at technology, so also what I'd like to do is introduce another way for you to share your thinking with the group, and that is, I'm going to get this to work now. Here it comes. You can tweet your thoughts to me, or not to me, to @poll. Use that as your first part of your tweet. Then the number 125616, and then your answer. So I think social learning is whatever. So @poll 125616, and then whatever you think. Or you can just text if you've got a mobile phone. You don't have to be on Twitter. You can just send a text message to 0203 322 5822. Put the text number in there, 125616, and then your message. So we can have a bit of traditional discussion, and we can have a little bit of more high-tech discussion. And hopefully, as you tweet and text, the responses appear on here as well. So we'll just spend 5 minutes for you to introduce yourselves to one another and to think about what you understand by the term social learning. So get started. I hope you had a quick discussion about what you understand by the term social learning, because I want to briefly say to you what I think social learning means, so that we're discussing the same thing here today. Let me grab this back. So I'm going to stop that to clear those results now. We'll have another go at that a bit later on. I'll put those on the website later. So let's bring it back over here. Right, move on to the next slide. Well, for me, social learning is nothing new. It's the way we've always learnt. It's a continuous process, something that we start as a child. It's the way we've learned how to do everything with our families. And as we go to school, we learn socially with our friends and colleagues, both inside the classroom and outside the classroom. Just being with others. And of course, in the workplace too, it's the same. We are learning with our colleagues in the classroom, in the workplace, and also in formal settings, the water cooler, as people sometimes refer to it, in meetings, and so forth. It's nothing new, social learning, and yet many people think it is new. But I suppose what is new about it is these new technologies that allow us to do these things much more, that enhance the whole possibilities of learning. Now, for many people, social media plus learning, it generally refers to that learning that takes place within a formal learning environment. But for me and my colleagues, we believe that these new technologies are really giving us an opportunity to support this kind of learning that takes place in the workplace, which up to now we've never really been able to get our hands on. We've never been able to influence or help in any way. So, for me, when I define social learning, I think there's two parts of it. There's the social learning, if you like, that is about using those social technologies for organized training events, let's say, both face-to-face and online, which I'm going to refer to as social training to make sure we quite clearly differentiate it between this other type of social learning, which is now beginning to be referred to as social collaboration. And this is much more about the use of the social technologies to support that knowledge sharing, or the ongoing knowledge sharing and collaborative working. And whereas in social training, if you like, when we're thinking about social learning within the context of formal training, is more about creating learning communities or developing and building learning communities. In this whole area of social collaboration, it's much more about supporting that ongoing knowledge sharing within work teams, project teams, and in communities of practice. And as my colleague Harold Jarkey says, the difference between a learning community and a community of practice is in a learning community you have to take part. In a community practice you choose generally to take part or to be there. But it's this whole area on the right-hand side which is where the learning department really haven't played a part before, because here they're very familiar with organizing learning events. Here it's much more about supporting those activities that are taking place. And so today I wanted to share with you some of these steps or tips, if you like, that successful companies are going through it in order to ensure that they can support social learning in the optimum way. Now, many of these steps, if you like, might be valid perhaps more for supporting social collaboration, but some of them are going to be relevant to social training, if that's really where you're interested in here, supporting most formal environments. But every initiative is going to be different, so you're going to have to take some of these steps and see how they fit with your own thinking. I also should say that each of these 12 steps really could be the subject of one whole session here, so I'm not going to be able to spend much time on them. I'm going to really have to gloss over them. I'm also going to try and provide you some examples of things I've seen that have worked well and things that have not worked so well and why they've not worked so well. And also going to try to think about other types of social interventions when organizations start to introduce a whole social network or community across the whole enterprise, and some of the successful ways that organizations are doing that. So we're going to take 10 quick steps, if you like, through this, and there'll be a couple of pauses during those steps for you to have a think about some of these implications as well. So let me get started. The first one is, I think, one needs to be very clear about the purpose of the initiative. Communities of practice have become a bit of a buzzword nowadays, and I often hear organizations or individuals saying, well, we're going to set up a community of practice. And that may be all well and good, but unfortunately I've come across many organizations where it's actually been the cause of many failures because they haven't actually thought it through what this community of practice is all about, what's involved. It just sounds like a good idea. So the organizations who are being successful are thinking very clearly about why they're doing this in the first place, what the reasons for setting up in the first place, what value they're getting, the individuals are going to get out of it, the team are going to get out of it, the organization's going to get out of it, and what it's going to offer to these individuals, why they're going to want to join or be part of such a group or community. So if we look at that chart again, I think what I'm seeing is that social interventions are often there to very much support the training outcomes. And that's fair enough. If you're building a community to support training outcomes, that's all well and good. But on the other side, it's much more about solving performance problems, which are generally associated with lack of communication or collaboration or knowledge sharing within teams and groups. But once we're clear about the purpose of these initiatives, we can start thinking about how they're going to determine whether they're successful or not. People often say success is about having numbers of people in communities, but it isn't really the best way to define success. So if you're setting up a community to solve a defined performance problem, you've already decided what your success criteria are going to be. It's going to be about making sure you determine, has that group or community met that problem or solved that problem? And the purpose of the group or community will also determine what you want people to be able to do in it, what functionality, if you like, is going to have, what kind of collaboration, support that is going to take place within it. And of course, from that, it leads us on to the whole concept of what the right technology is. And for me, it's about making sure we use the right, or the appropriate technology. Now, that might sound a little bit glib, but what I'm seeing is that in social learning environments, we're seeing the growth of more social learning platforms. And these are working very well for those defined communities that are supporting the social training aspect, the more formal context of our social initiative. But where they're going wrong, or where I've seen some poor examples, is when they've tried to use those platforms to support more social collaborative activities. One example of an initiative I saw that didn't work very well was where it tried to use a traditional training, social training platform, if you like, to support a working group. I've done a mock-up here just for you to get a feel of it. This is not the real thing. This is just my attempt to try and show you why it was wrong or why it didn't work. It used a fairly traditional platform, one that was commonplace in the training department. Called it a sales team group space. The idea was to support the sales team. It began to suggest some discussions started to appear on there, but it didn't really take off. When we looked at why the problem was, it became quite clear, while speaking to the individuals, that the whole platform was riddled with training technology. It talked about courses and teachers and students. It wasn't seen as something that was taking place in the workplace. It was seen as a very defined training initiative. And the individuals concerned were very confused about, is this a working initiative or is this a training initiative? They didn't know whether they're being monitored or their progress was being viewed in any way. And it wasn't part of their workflow. It was a very separate activity. So it really didn't take off very well at all. Whereas on the other hand, some of the other organizations are beginning to use some of these new platforms that are appearing in organizations, these new social collaborative platforms, which are fairly generic. They are not intended for learning and development or training, but they're being used across the organization for many different kinds of social initiatives. I'm sure many of you are familiar with some of these names. Probably Yammer's a well-known one. These are proprietary ones in the middle. These are some open source names down the bottom. They do tend to have very similar functionality in as much as they have this whole focus on this activity stream, a constant stream of real-time updates. People can share all kinds of resources. There's this whole concept of member profiling. But it also allows people to create fairly defined groups within those networks and even have external networks in some of them. These are looking much more like the sort of traditional Facebooky environments in which they are fairly familiar, many of the people nowadays. But they're not just supporting these new, just supporting social collaborative activities, they're supporting the whole wide range of initiatives. So many organizations are actually using them now to kind of provide the focus for their social training. And in fact, I used BuddyPress, which was one of the open source ones I mentioned earlier, to provide the infrastructure for my social learning center. This isn't about a learning management system. This is about people coming together to discuss all kinds of issues about new trends in the workplace. And as you can see, it has this very similar feel, this whole activity stream. The whole idea was to get discussions going. And what we did was we embedded the content within the community. Didn't have two activities, didn't have the content over here and the community over here, very firmly embedded within one. And people were asked to just discuss, and there was whole ongoing conversations, threaded discussions. So these new tools are being used in perhaps more traditional environments. And I think the key to success is finding the right platform, trying not to force the wrong platform into the wrong one for the wrong solution. But even more importantly, I found, is that it's important to define who owns that initiative. Clearly, if it's a training initiative, the learning and development are going to own it. But when it comes to supporting workplace learning, is a training and learning and development partner the best person to own it? Well, again, in my experience, when learning and development department supports the activities of the team, they have a much better chance of success, because as soon as the training department takes over, they're tended to see as, this is a training initiative. Let's say support, let's also say become a partner with. Now, one of the great examples I've seen of this was QA Training's Sales 365 platform, which won the recent eLearning Age Social Award. And from that, it was very clear that Learning Development Department played a part in supporting the role of the sales director. The sales director had a defined problem. He wanted to improve sales. They thought together about the initiative, and Learning Development partnered with the sales department to create this new initiative to support the problem. And if you have a chance to have a look at it, you can see how and why it was so successful. So be clear about who owns it. And the other way that you can really show that who owns it is that most of these communities need someone to steward them. They don't just kind of exist on their own unless they've been kind of self-organized. But when they become an initiative, it's more of a top-down initiative, they need someone to help them move things along. And if this is somebody from the training department, again, it still gives out the wrong signals that it's a training initiative. But L&D, I think, have a great part to play in supporting someone to become the steward or the community manager, whatever you want to call them, to steward that whole community along, or work group, and help people with that initiative. So the next one on my list is launch when you are ready. And when then is ready? Okay, you've been asked by the sales team to help with creating something that's going to support the problems with the sales team, who need to perhaps, let's say, increase their numbers of sales by more collaboration and knowledge sharing. You've agreed on the platform. Let's say you've decided on Yammer. You've set that all up, and the sales manager has put in a message saying, welcome to the sales team's new group space. Are you ready? Is that ready? Well, unfortunately for many organizations, they think that is ready, and that's, again, the cause of some problems, because that really isn't ready to launch. What happens is, generally they put that out, nothing happens, so we get another message saying, here's our community again, or we end up with a whole series of broadcast messages. Nothing happens. So we've been through the steps of getting planning it all, got the right technology, but it hasn't worked. It's not ready. So what do you think it needs before it is ready? What do you think needs to be done before this group space is ready? Here's your chance for another 5 minutes. And once again, if you want to share your thoughts in a poll, I'm going to do the same again, if I can. There. You can do the quiet viral launch, or you can do the big bang launch, which is, the flash mob. But that was a way that they got interest started. And they got, if you're interested in this, there's a YouTube video. You can read the write-up of how she organized it. Loads of people involved, some of them dancing, some of them actually just choreographing it, some people just organizing it in the background. But they did a big initiative to get this whole use of Yama for their Everest University off the ground. Now, that might not work for your organization, but it obviously did work for these people. Other organizations have done things like treasure hunts, a way of kicking things off, but try to be a little bit different, try to make it a little bit different from the normal enterprise launch of a product or of a platform. So let me just close that one down, then go back to the presentation. So the viral launch, or the big bang song and dance launch. But I think one thing is clear, whatever happens, people are going to need to, as some people said, to understand what the value of this system is going to bring for them. But it's not just going to be about training them to use the software. Most of the best, more successful initiatives are actually helping people to use the tools within the environment they're working about, not as a separate entity. But one thing is very clear, it's helping them understand how it can become part of their daily routine. As you all know, if something is not part of your routine, you don't do it. If it's something extra to your work, you don't do it. So many of these successful initiatives, the work takes place here. This is where they work and they learn and they share knowledge and they work collaboratively with one another. It's part of their daily workflow. But if it isn't, then you need to be quite clear how you're going to help them make sure it becomes part of their daily workflow. Spending time helping them ensure that it becomes just a part of their daily routine. And that will mean helping them understand whether they should do this perhaps by spending time, a certain time each day, like a bit in the morning, but at lunchtime, but in the evening to get involved, or whether they're the type of people who like sort of a drip feed of notifications coming through to them. We all like to do things different. I like lots of things happening, notifications. Other people like a bit of focus and just go and spend time on it. So it'll be really about helping people make this part of their daily routine, because unless it is, it's just not going to be used. People will just forget about it after the big song and dance as they've forgotten it. So right from the outset, it's important, and the most successful organizations are ensuring that it's well embedded into the workflow and part of an individual's daily work. The other thing that successful organizations are very clear about is understanding that not everyone will contribute. I guess if I'm come here today, how do we make everybody contribute? How do we make everybody participate? Well, I'm afraid it's probably not likely to happen all the time. I'm sure you've seen this slide here. Back in 2006, Jakob Nielsen was talking about the 99-1 rule, this whole participation in inequality, that 90% of people lurk and 90% of postings come from just the 1%. And when he was asked, how do you overcome this participation inequality back in 2006, he just said, you can't. You've got to recognize it's always going to be with us, as it existed in every community. All you can do is try and achieve a more equitable distribution. Try and improve those participation rates. And in fact, some recent research has shown that probably it's now looking slightly different. People have become more comfortable in these kind of environments, and we're looking, perhaps lurking has decreased a bit. We've got more people perhaps beginning to create, more people becoming sort of interactive on an irregular basis. But you're never actually going to get everybody contributing all of the time. All you can do is try to encourage people to participate and get involved. So we have a few minutes coming up now. Perhaps just like to spend a few minutes on this. What do you think you can do to improve participation rates? What things will you need to do after that big launch, when things are quieting down and it's gone back to normality? What can you do to improve those and keep people contributing? Thank you very much again. Lots of interesting things coming through there. I wanted to show you a few examples of things people have been doing to try and encourage participation rates. As I said, the successful companies aren't focusing on the membership count and participation rates to demonstrate the value of their communities. They're much more interested in the performance results that are coming out of those communities. The other thing that they are very conscious of, let me just move this back over to here, whoops, is that you can't force people to be social. You can only encourage people to be social. So, setting up enforced things, it's going to backfire. So it's about thinking about ways that we can really get value out of it. And one of the ways that some organizations do it, the ones we've been helping, and this is really sort of come from my colleague Harold Jockey, is helping people to narrate their work. Think out loud, to learn out loud, to work out loud, whatever you like to call it. And essentially it means showing them how they should share their daily experiences along the way. And again, it's not about telling them to narrate their work. No, you must narrate your work every day. It's about showing them what it means. It's about modeling rather than shaping. It's about helping them understand what it is to be social. And this is really the role of the community manager. It's not about just telling people, right, you get caught talking. It's about becoming social and helping others to become social. And in terms of narrating their work, it could be showing them how to write, say, a 100-word summary of their day, what invigorated them, what frustrated them, what they plan to do next, and so forth. Now, you might think that is opening a can of worms, that you're asking for trouble here. But in fact, the places where I've seen this working, it's worked extremely well because then other people have seen these postings, or other people having perhaps issues or problems in specific areas and realizing, oh, it's not just me, and they've got together and they've solved their problems together or found ways to communicate or collaborate in other ways, things that perhaps weren't even the minds of the people who helped to set up these communities in the first place. So this whole narration of work is quite important because it helps to bring people and identify problems, but it can also help to document all those small wins that happen every day that really don't get recognized, that you've achieved, perhaps just a small thing along the path to some bigger target, let's say. So just helping people to 100 words a night, perhaps before they go, or what they've done, what they got out of their day. And as I said, it's been, for some of those organizations, it's really been quite a useful way of inspiring people to work together and to solve other problems which they hadn't been aware of. But as I mentioned earlier, it's a role, every community that probably hasn't been set up by the people themselves, that's perhaps been imposed upon them maybe in some sort of way, particular work groups, needs some sort of person or community manager to keep that whole thing alive. I noticed people talked about seeding and feeding the space. That's going to be important. That first flush of enthusiasm is going to wear off, and you're going to have a regular way of keeping conversations going. Not just broadcast messages. That's where things go wrong. You just write a message, right, today we're going to do so-and-so. It's got to be asking questions, all kinds of things. Using polls. I mean, these are some of the perhaps not some obvious ones. Using hot seats. There's a huge range of things we could talk about. Using the platform as a back channel. Yammer, for instance, is great for doing a kind of using it like a Twitter back channel. So you've got a very private channel at a meeting or an event or a conference or whatever it is. Have a very private channel where you can have conversations. And that's worked extremely well with some organizations. So they've used it within meetings to document their meetings and to keep a record of proceedings, people's thoughts that they haven't been able to articulate in those meetings. It's also been used very successfully for sort of live synchronous chats. You're probably aware of the Twitter chats that take place regularly. People come together and tweet together using hashtags all about a subject. In Yama, for instance, they call them yam jams, and they're very similar. They've organized people coming together synchronously and having a chat. So these kind of group spaces or platforms, whatever you like to call them, have a role that's not just about work, it's about supporting all kinds of face-to-face and asynchronous and synchronous activities. And I think, you know, there's many, many more things I could have mentioned there. People talked about rewarding people. I think that the rewards need to come from within rather than externally. But of course, there's still going to be people who are still a bit unsure about it. And I think this is where the community manager has a role offline to go and perhaps provide one-to-one support with people perhaps who aren't participating. Just a friendly word, what the problem is. And in most cases, I've found that it's usually somebody who doesn't feel they've got anything of value to say, rather than anything else. Perhaps not totally confident with the technology, usually things like that. And once you give them a helping hand, and also show them that it's quite okay to lurk for a while before they start to comment or to start to post themselves, that's fine. And so it shouldn't necessarily be all done online. Just those very friendly offline moments can actually help to bring others on board. But I think the most important thing I wanted to say is that every organization that's done successfully says that you mustn't underestimate the time it takes to do this. As I said up front, you know, communities of practice are pretty much a buzzword nowadays. Everyone wants to add them to their course or do this or that. But unless you're going to take it seriously, unless you've got somebody who's time to spend to ensure that you take it through this journey of people, getting people on board and then continuing to enthuse them and make that a vibrant community, is just not going to work. And I would say failure is probably worse than even trying. So I think if you're prepared to put the commitment in, you can see some huge benefits. So I'm coming towards the end now. Probably only a few minutes left, unless anybody has some burning questions. As I said, in an hour, I can't really cover everything. I'm just going to put a quick plug in for my little workshop that I run that's going to start on Friday. I run a 1-month workshop on online communities. It was actually happening on Friday through February. We run it at the Social Learning Community Centre, and we'll be discussing all those things in much bigger or much more detail, and looking at a lot of readings that support everything I've been saying, and some examples and so forth, and resources from around the web. So if anybody's interested in that, there's about 35 people already on it, so there's going to be a lot of interesting discussion, as always, on these sessions. They're not, again, it's not about me just talking about it. It's giving a bit of stimulation through reading and other people discussing and sharing, just like I've seen today with some of these tweets and messages coming in through Poll Everywhere. But for those of you who just want to get hold of the slide set, I put it onto SlideShare and embedded it into this page. If you go there, bit.ly/10SL steps, it'll take you to a page of my website where you can look at the slide set and many of the resources, links to many of the resources I mentioned today. The link to the Yama flash mob on YouTube, to some of the research I've mentioned, and so forth. So we're coming towards the end. If anyone's got any burning questions, I might be able to answer it. But otherwise, I'm sure you want to get out to your glass of champagne. So I think, unless anybody says yes, one question.
Thank you. What experience do you have with combining a community with also making decision on a medium level in the organization on new training setups, new training courses, or something like that?
You mean using a community environment in order to make those decisions? I think.
Yes.
Well, I think communities and groups have a lifetime. If you set one up with a very defined period of working on a particular project, that's great. And then, don't try and force it on after its time has come and gone. And I think one of the things I didn't mention is you don't flog a dead horse. If something has been successful and it's achieved its purpose, finish it and get on that. And I think in those cases, but for very small defined projects, they can be a very good way of sharing, especially if the people are, all around the world or in different places. It's a resource, collate materials, and also the opportunity to discussion. So I think they have a very good part to play in any big or small project like that.
Thank you.
How do we go about understanding the real importance of this stuff? I mean, what's the risk if we just leave today and think, no, I'm not going to bother going on that journey?
Sorry, what was that? What's the risk of?
What's the risk if we leave today and just say, you know what, it's just too much effort? I mean, how do we know?
Let's say it's going to happen anyway. You're just not going to be part of it.
Okay, and why is that a problem?
Because people are already doing this. They're already creating their own groups and doing this themselves. Yama, you don't actually have to have the top-down initiative. People have already set up groups. They're working together. But if you'd like to have a part of it and help to define what it means for the organisation, get involved.
Okay. Yeah, no, I guess what I'm hearing, though, is it really should be an operationally led activity anyway.
It should be.
It should be an operationally led activity anyway. So, I guess
ideally for sort of work teams, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, ideally, but it is happening. People are creating their own groups and doing their own things because the organisation hasn't got the gap together. But I think L&D have a great role to play in all this because they can bring in all their experience, how to share knowledge. As long as they don't take that controlling approach, just become a supporting partner, I think they've got a fantastic opportunity to help. This is going to happen, as I say, and it is already happening.
Okay, thank you.
Right, it's 4:30. Jane, do you want to take one more question, or does everybody want to leave for their champagne? I think we have somebody who wants to keep everybody here for one more question. One more.
I've just realised how unpopular I am. But I just wanted to ask you, how much research and evidence is there from what you're showing here that it actually impacts on performance and learning outcomes?
Well, we're talking about performance outcomes here, and if they're well defined, there have been very documented cases of people having very considerable benefits from them, yes. And if their learning outcomes the same, probably as well. There's lots of evidence out there. If you come and look on the website, you'll find lots of links to lots of places that have done it. You know, it's not flash in the pan stuff anymore. This is well evident stuff now.
Thank you. I'll let people go and drink champagne.
Right, thank you very much. Whoops. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much, Jane. You are now released.